Good morning. Assuming it's morning for you. Maybe it's not. It is for me. It's almost 5 o'clock. I just woke up. So my medication slowly getting to the point where it's doing the things that medication does. So what am I doing? Well, I wanted to this morning have a video where I get into a little bit of what I think is unfortunately esoteric, and that is sample size fallacy. Esoteric is esoteric. Esoteric roughly translates to something that is generally only understood by a small group of people. Synonym might be arcane or obscure. That's why I love the word esoteric. Esoteric is esoteric. So I think sample size fallacy isn't necessarily esoteric because it is structured in a way that should be accessible and understood. It's just intentionally obscured or obfuscated. And that obfuscation generally means that you take something that should be simple or something that should be straightforward and you make it unstraightforward. You'll find I do that a lot. Not intentionally, but there are people that do that intentionally. And there's a reason you do it intentionally. It is the foundational understanding that you need to understand a wide array of much more complex topics. You see this, to me, I want to talk about the things that, I see routinely and consistently misunderstood, misrepresented, and just generally misinformed. And why do they do that? Well, there's generally two reasons. One, they don't know any better, and that's understandable, right? They're a victim of misinformation themselves. And the second one, and the more nefarious, is it's intentional because I have a point that I need to make, and my point only works if I take data and I misrepresent it. The same data set or data sample can be misconstrued or manipulated and just simply represented in a particular view using a particular filter to support almost anything that you want it to support, right? Like, as it obviously pertains within the ecosystem that the data is relevant to. And that's unfortunate, right? It's unfortunate that people will do that because it gets to the point where you actually have situations where people don't trust data, right? Like they say, oh, well, that data, is untrustworthy because, I've seen people say certain statistics that didn't represent what they wanted it to represent. Those were racist statistics. Well, as somebody who has built their career in science, engineering, and as a programmer, there's a mathematical aspect to it. I take sort of offense with the idea that these things can represent themselves in any way other than what they represent. And I don't take offense personally. I take offense professionally. I take offense to what that does to us as a species, the human condition, because it does a disservice to us when people begin to not trust numbers, when people begin to not trust data. And data is data. Data has no objective, right? Data doesn't care how you feel about it. That's not the reason it exists. The reason it exists is to represent what it represents. Nothing more, nothing less. What you get out of it is up to you. I see data all the time that is sometimes disheartening, that I don't want to see, and I see data misrepresented all the time to get points across, and that's just, as I said, very, very unfortunate. Not where we want to be. We don't want people not trusting data because if you have an opinion, if you have a worldview, and that worldview is flawed because data can be provided to you in the correct format and with the correct controls that shows your worldview is incorrect. A mature and intelligent person would then begin to refine or course correct their worldview to better represent what the actual data says. Now, if you then decide to be stubborn and ignore data, then that's a personal issue. It's a flaw that unfortunately I think is going to prevent you from finding success in life. But if you are willing to, say, all right, well, I was wrong about this. The data doesn't show that. Let me change my view. Let me refine something. Then That's an intellectual maturity that will pay dividends, right? You will be more successful if you are willing to change your worldviews. And you can only change your worldviews if you can understand the data. And you can only understand the data if you understand fallacies, pitfalls, and manipulations that can occur with data to throw you off. And now you'll find that this is applicable in so many areas, right? So many. You will start seeing all kinds of examples. So one example that, that I will use to sort of show, and we'll get into sample size here in a moment, but correlation does not imply causation fallacy. So this is a very simple fallacy that basically says just because you can establish a pattern in the data doesn't mean that the data points are caused by or represent anything that relates to that pattern, right? Is there a way for me to write that out numerically? Easily, no. But there's a pretty easy way to show you what... oh man, my pen's not calibrated correctly. There's a pretty easy way to show you an example of this, because there was an example that I saw that was great, and I think it's, you can talk about it. We can kind of get into the details of why this is problematic. So I'm hoping this will bring up the text box. Oh, so that's interesting. So there's like a placeholder text. This is not going to do what I want it to do, which is fine. So what we're going to do is we're just going to use the old keyboard. All right. So I once saw a headline that says, "Study shows more intelligent people prefer cats." Now I have 7 cats, so I'm all on board with this, right? All right. So let's take a look at this statement, right? So what are some of the problems that this statement has? Well, again, this is a correlation does not imply causation statement. So if we begin to so this was essentially saying cats over dogs, right? Because this, that's always what people are talking about, cats over dogs. So let's talk about the problematic areas on this statement. All right. So first, we're going to highlight. It really sucks that this thing is just not behaving the way that it used to. So first, let's switch the color. I keep hitting the wrong button. Let's do red. All right. So study's a problem, intelligence a problem, and cats is a problem. All right. Why is this a problem? Well, first off, study, right? That's appeal to authority fallacy, right? They're trying to say, well, look, science says it, therefore it's true. That's a problem. Second thing is intelligent. Why is intelligent a problem? Well, intelligence is a problem because you can't really quantify that, right? That requires almost a sub-study, right? So you need essentially another study that needs to be done in order to really quantify this, and you need a baseline. Like, what does that mean comparative to who? Yada, yada, yada. And then cats. Why is cats even involved in this study? What do cats represent, right? So how did they get here? Well, this is very simple, right? Anyone that's ever owned a cat knows cats, compared to a dog, are very sort of self-managed, right? They don't require nearly as much time and effort as a dog, right? Like, they have a litter box, they have their food. If you set up automatic litter boxes and automatic food, you almost have to do nothing with a cat. Maybe once or twice a week you have to do some maintenance with the cat. Cats are not as needy from an attention and mental health standpoint. They're much more independent in that regards. They want attention when they do, and then they don't when they don't, right? That's about it. Other than, like, scratching your furniture, cats, they bathe themselves, they entertain themselves. They are very independent animals. So how does that relate to a dog? Well, it's a very simple thing, right? That's time, right? So really what they're saying here is that intelligent people have less time, more than likely, right? Why do they have less time? Well, they have less time because the more intelligent you are, the more likely you are to have a career, right? And if you have a career, the more likely you are to have less time to spend on an animal. Totally makes sense to me, at least, right? So obviously there's problems here. One, you're creating a divisive narrative, right? You're already saying here's an us versus them, right? People that are not intelligent, right? So now they're saying if you have a dog, you're not as intelligent, right? Well, geez, that's a hell of a statement, right? And I think I even saw some articles that would say study shows that dogs may cause you to be less intelligent, right? Or cats may be the reason why. So this is the same data that is creating all these different headlines that are completely nonsensical, right? What did the study actually show? The study showed a very simple thing, right? The data simply showed that people with careers prefer cats because they have less time to deal with the upkeep of other animals. That's all the study said, right? Or at least that was the extrapolation of some of the study, because it didn't even necessarily even say that they prefer this and this is why. It's just this was a pattern it saw. That's a problem. That's a problem for a lot of reasons, right? One of the reasons that's a problem is, let's say this study was a $5 million study, right? Not exactly a lot of money, right? Like not something that you're going to sit there and say, okay, well, oh my God, that's $5 million that if they got a government grant or some sort of subsidy to do this, this looks bad because this, one, is a misrepresentation, as we just talked about. Two, it also doesn't actually translate into anything tangible for society, right? Does knowing this suddenly change our outlooks on cats or careers or people? No, this has almost no value, right? Almost no value. Now, we don't really know, and that's partially my fault. I probably should have found out what was the original objective. What sort of abstraction were they looking to address with this study? But for the most part, this study at this level doesn't look any bit valuable. Now, why are the headlines designed like this? Well, the headlines are designed like this for a variety of reasons. One, it's clickbait, right? If you have a cat, you're going to click on this and you're going to say, oh, I have a cat, therefore this is something great about me. It's stroking my ego. I'm going to go post this on social media to all my cat friends, and maybe it'll be funny and we can share this on a cat meme page, whatever. And then on the other end, the dog people are going to get, annoyed with it, and they're going to have sort of an approach, and they're going to click on it. And so what it does is it creates controversy or creates hate clicks, which creates revenue and traffic and yada, 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 engagement. And really that's ultimately what they're doing, is they're trying to bait you to their site to look at maybe some of the other articles that they feel like are more value rich, and they want you to look at that stuff or to go to their website, or at the very least artificially increase their traffic so that they can get more money from their advertisers and what have you. But this is a problem because, again, all the reasons I just listed, but also this $5 million, right? You have this $5 million but that comes out of some sort of appropriation budgets from some sort of study grant, some sort of whatever grant. These people are going to now say, we're not doing that again, right? We could give that $5 million to law enforcement, which has an immediate return on investment, military, whatever. That money may now start to be reappropriated in the next budget rebalance, based upon the fact that they feel like there's other areas where this could be valuable, and now you just took money away from science, right? So that's, to me that's a clear problem. Like, why would you want to diminish the opportunity for education and science to get money to be able to do good work because you're doing bad work, right? Like, that's, this to me is very similar to when people call stats racist, right? Like, this is just as problematic because this creates a public distrust of information. I think that at one point I remember somebody saying, throughout my lifetime, I'm almost 40, you heard them talk about study shows that this particular micronutrient is good for you, and then there'll be a study 10 years later to say, oh well, actually it's bad for you. And then 10 years later it says actually it's good for you, and then 10 years later, well, it's actually bad for you if you take it in this. And it's like, it gets to the point where now people just ignore nutritional studies because they don't trust them. They have motives that are existential to the actual readers, the reader's benefit, and that's problematic because now you have a population that doesn't trust the science. And if you saw that movie Don't Look Up with Leonardo DiCaprio and J-Law, about where people generally didn't trust the science about a meteor coming, and they didn't do anything about it till it was too late and it wiped out humanity. That's what happens from something like that, right? Like, people just don't trust the science. They think that there's a spin or there's a political motive, and a lot of times there is. And the only way we get past that is by educating ourselves to what some of these things mean. All right, so that was the correlation, not-imply causation fallacy, right? Very, very basic. The correlation between the data point of people with careers having cats did not correlate to a causation of they're intelligent, therefore they prefer cats. Or, like I said, the more ridiculous versions, I tried saying cats make people intelligent. Same data, very different outputs. So where do we go from there? I'm sorry, I had such a dry mouth this morning. So where we go from there is I'm out of drink. I need to get me some more. Got me a case because I'm a fatty. Even though these are 0 calories, but it doesn't matter. Got me a case of these 0 sugar Dr. Pepper cherries. They are phenomenal. I love the fact that even though aspartame is probably helping my brain tumor grow bigger, I love the fact that we have gotten to the point where we have all these varieties of complex, sugarless, calorie-free flavors of things. And on the notion of nutrition science, there was the only thing I ever saw in all my years of research that everyone agreed upon was that processed sugar was the devil. Now, processed sugar is a fascinating thing because sugar, when it's removed from sugarcane and it's originally processed, it actually has a sort of molasses, brown sugary taste and look to it. They process it where they essentially bleach it and turn it into what it is. And then when they make brown sugar, they simply add artificial coloring and flavor back to it, which to me is just so wild. So I generally don't do sugar if I can help it. If I bake, I do raw cane sugar. And then I mostly use stevia. And then I drink mostly water, but obviously I just woke up, so I need caffeine. And that is what the 0 sugar Dr. Peppers are for. And there's just so many flavors that, to me, they're spot on. Obviously, I'm sure if I went and I had a real soda, and I can't tell you when's the last time I had a real soda, I'm sure if I had it, I would notice the difference. It's like, wow, that is rich. That is flavorful. So sample size fallacy. So there's layers to this. We'll start off with a simple layer, and we'll get into the deeper stuff. And I really need you to kind of commit this to memory, if you could, please, because this to me is one of over my years of gaming, watching intellectuals, politics. It didn't matter. Almost every vector and area of my life, I have seen this misunderstood, and I just don't understand why. It just takes a moment to understand it. Obviously, my videos long-winded, as they will be, so maybe that's why people don't want to learn this stuff. I don't have a clue, but if you have this is a great tool that will help you in future conversations dealing with people that are misrepresenting data. So we will just take a marker here. Is that a marker? It just says basic opacity. Well, all right. Anyways, so that is way too big of a thing. Way too small. Alright, that's good. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what I'm going to call 1 through 10. And then we're going to talk about 11 through 100. And why I am bringing this up. Alright, so what do we have here is 2 sample sizes, right? Their overall representation is really 1 through 100. So suppose I have a coin, right? And for argument's sake, it doesn't really matter what the coin is, just any coin, and you're going to flip it, right? So you have, in this coin, you flipped it, God, I keep hitting the wrong button. You flip it 100 times. The first 10 times you do it, 9 times are tails. It's terrible tails. All right, T. If you, yeah, oh, sorry, I'm just not the best handwriting. It's Y code. And then 1 time is heads, right? So you got 9, 1. All right. So if you look at this, and I said, what are the likelihood? What is the probability? What's the likelihood? What is the percent chance that on roll 11 you're going to get tails, right? So one of the problems that you'll see is you'll see a misunderstanding of probability. We can get into probability in a minute, but just in short, probability really says what the word implies, right? Probable. What is the probable outcome, right? So you really only have 2 outcomes. And so this is something a lot of people miss, right? You have a 1 in 2 chance. That is your potential outputs. You can only get tails and heads. I guess technically you could land on its edge, or you could lose it, right? So there are technically more outcomes than just those 2. But in a controlled environment where you're going to get 1 of the 2, what is the probability? Well, it's 1 in 2. Always will be 1 in 2. So you always have 50-50. Like, that never changes. And that's a very binary thing, because I'm also asking you the question, tails. What is the likelihood you're going to get tails? I'm not asking you what's the likelihood you get heads. Now, there's a implication there, right? The implication is if you get tails, you're not getting heads. So the question could also be, what's the probability that you don't get heads, right? So, say the same thing in different ways, but since I'm asking something very specifically, as far as probability, that's, there's a 1 in 2 chance that you'll get heads or tails, really, either one. So when people are looking at something like this, what they're really talking about is they're looking at historical performance or historical metrics. What did it do thus far, right? So thus far, it was 90%, right? Pretty simple. You got it. 90% output or 90% of tails. So where somebody makes the mistake then is they then say, okay, so if I have a 90%, I then flip the coin 11 through 100 more times, right? And maybe it's just early, but my brain was lagging there, so 89 times. So if you flip the coin 89 times and you have the expectation of 90% tails, you just made what is probably going to be a big mistake, right? Now, you may not necessarily see it, because here's what ends up happening. God, if I hit this button one more time. What ends up happening is, let's say, the inverse. Let's just say, for whatever wild and crazy reasons, you actually end up getting 89 times heads, 0 times tail, right? So now you have 90 heads and 9 tails, right? You never got another tail, right? You got 90 heads, right? Well, we're also actually missing, so it actually would have to be 91. Good Lord. Again, just woke up. Brain not fully functioning. So let's say 91 heads, 9 tails, right? So now, just based upon the fact that you've introduced a new sample size, right, a much larger sample size, your numbers haven't just inverted, but you now have 91% heads, right? That's a problem, right? So if I led you to believe, based upon this sample size up here, that you have a 90% tails outlook, you might actually believe that, right? Like, why wouldn't you? I have data to show it. Like, hey, man, I did the work. I did the experiment. I can show you. 9 out of 10 times. That's 90%. Oh, yeah, no, that sounds right. Yeah. So people will take that and they'll run with it. And that's not it, right? Like, you stop there, because you have to understand that looking at this, honestly, none of this is a big enough sample size, right? Because maybe to you, when you're looking at something like this, you think to yourself, well, given the conditions of the test, we actually need closer to like 1 in 1 million, right? But again, here's the next problem. You do that, and what if you then flip it another 5 million times? And those results are nowhere near what you saw with the 1 mil or the this or this, right? Now what? Now how do you reconcile that? Well, what you end up realizing is that you need this information, right? You need to know your sample size. You need to know how big was this experiment, this study, this thing they did, who did they include, what did these people represent, and so that's what they call controls, right? You have to control for these things. And what I say by that is, let's say they're doing a study. I remember researching that one of the few studies out there that was ever really done in regards to condom size was like at a spring break or something like that, right? And it was done by Trojan because they were trying to get an idea of what sort of products that they should manufacture. And because this was the largest study ever done, and it was really just a bunch of drunk spring breakers down in Cancun, Mexico, if I remember the study correctly. And they were trying to correlate, was there any sort of genetic or racial indicators that had anything to do with endowment. Now, to me, it was a ridiculous study because they had so many problems. One, these were drunk spring breakers that were not probably being honest, right? And once you threw controls in, you actually realized that this was junk data. This was a bad study. This was bad science. This had no real value to what they needed it for, and it definitely had no value to be the largest study ever done on the topic. So you have a lot of incorrect social preconceived notions as far as the racial correlation to endowments, and that will probably never be addressed, right? Never be solved, because you need a clinical study on something like that. And who's going to, again, back to like the prior example, when it comes down to appropriations, who's going to go and try to get a grant for doing this sort of science, and what value does it have? Maybe it does have value. Maybe the value is only in shutting people down when it comes down to these weird sort of childish conversations, or there is an actual value because there are businesses that have to have these data points to understand their target markets and what have you, right? Like if you're going to build something for very large endowments and you are then going to sell that in a market, let's say that market, like, you want to expand into Asia Pacific, and there's this social belief that endowments there are on the smaller sample size, then you're probably gonna have some issues if you're trying to sell your magnums, right? Like if you're trying to sell your magnums there, they're probably not gonna be a hot seller if it's true, right? So there is a reason that someone that manufactures these products may need that information, may need that data, but now they can't trust their own study because they in all their infinite wisdom thought asking young 20-year-olds who were intoxicated and likely around friends what they were packing, and lo and behold, they probably got incorrect answers. Now, the interesting point of that study is based upon the data that they got. They said that there was no discernible differences between any of the races, except as it would happen to be, I'm sorry for my Asian viewers, but that was unfortunately the only conclusive difference was as it pertained to Asian men did report, at least in this study, that they were smaller than the rest of the races. Is that true? What is it? Does it really matter? No, it really doesn't, because it's still junk data at the end of the day. Were they able to run with this and actually change any of their manufacturing expectations? I doubt it. I think with some of those things, what they have to do is forecast based upon based upon sales, right? Like you just sort of do proof of concepting or prototyping, right? Send out a product into a particular market and just see how it performs respective to your other products, based upon certain metrics like that. And if clearly one thing is selling higher than the other, that's what you prioritize in manufacturing and distributing in that market. So this is known as business intelligence. Business intelligence is, if you ever want to be a business intelligence analyst, there's some pretty decent money there. It's fun stuff, I think. I think they have a lot of fun doing some of that stuff. It's what they call big data. It's where you have to sort of take big raw data in large sample sizes such as this, or much larger, sometimes very complex layered data, and you have to unwind it and sort of pack it in a way where somebody can understand it, right? Like, because your business leadership, they need to be able to understand these things, to make decisions, to make changes, to course correct on certain things. And if the information is incorrect, or if it's too big and they can't understand what it means, because you do have large sample sizes that are not consumable, then obviously that's a problem. So there is a lot of jobs in the world of data, right? You even have data scientists, right? In my job, I do a lot of stuff with data, a lot of data manipulation, data mappings, things like that, and I can get into some of those and sort of explain what data mapping is, because I do a lot of API development and integration between applications that are not generally designed to talk to each other. A lot of applications are not. So they have their own sort of data framework, and you have to sort of figure out how to take this data and make it work with this data, which is just really a lot of mapping. If you remember as a kid, you'd take those tests where it's like connect the lines between the things. You'd have one group here and another group here. You have to connect the lines. It's a lot of, that's a very simplistic representation of it, but it's kind of like that, right? Like you have to find the data that correlates to another data point, or as close to it, maybe requires some manipulation to get it to the format that you want it. And that's what you do. That's a lot of times if people integrate things into APIs, that's what they're doing. Sometimes the APIs are a little bit more friendly, especially as we move towards what seems to be this industry-wide standardization of JSON over XMLs. XMLs were not a horrible thing, but they were very unwieldy. Took a lot of work to work with them. They're still very common out there now because they had such a large market share, but JSONs are slowly taking over that. You even have databases now that don't use SQL. They use NoSQL concepts such as MongoDB, which actually stores documents in JSON format, which is pretty cool. I'm pretty certain Google Cloud has a cloud native known as Firestore that does the same thing. I'm not sure if it is really tooled and tuned for JSONs, but it is a document sort of thing. I actually have a Google Cloud certification coming up. I am not looking forward to that. Anyways, so I'm not sure if there's any questions about this. I think, to me, this is a pretty straightforward basic concept. You just have to understand that, when you look at something even like this, right, you have to understand what is its representation between each of these, and the fact that if you're doing 100 roles, your first 10 will be one thing, your first 100 will be another, your first 100,000 will be another, and then half a million will be one. And you most likely will have an outcome that is pretty close to 50-50 if you let the sample size get big enough. And I think that's the main point to get from something in this particular context, right? When you have something like this, if you make the sample size large enough, you more likely than not will actually get to a point where you start to pick up on some interesting correlations. So one thing is let's say this is the side view of your coin, right? And let's say this is your heads, right? and then let's say that this is your tails. So obviously this is a horrible piece of art, but the main thing I want to show you is that, to us, we almost can't discern, on a coin, the sort of differences and the raised texture and the things that we're looking at, right? Like, to us, it's just a coin. But there are differences that will make a pretty big difference. So, like, for heads, the reason why most people feel like it lands on heads more than it does tails is probably because if you look, the head has just a slight raise over here with a little bit more metal material, which likely will make it weighted a little heavier. So the way that it flies will be different. So this is something I did want to kind of talk about a little bit. So a real true accurate representation, the coin would probably have to look a little bit more like this, and the only way that you could discern it is maybe you took like a marker and put like a dot there and a dot there, of two different colors, so you knew which one was one side and which one was the other side. And if the coin is flipped, if the coin was manufactured so that both sides are nearly identical, and then you would probably need a containment, like a controlled testing environment, right? Like a controlled lab, maybe a box where the pressure inside of it's consistent, the wind conditions are consistent, everything is consistent, so that you're not dealing with different things. And then you would need probably a contraption in the middle. And what does this contraption do? This contraption just flips the coin in a consistent way. So that is the scientific method, right? The scientific method requires consistency so that you can get honest and accurate representation of your process for your data gaining, right? And if you do that, then you're going to get a much more accurate, a much more sanitized output in your data samples, and your samples are going to be cleaner and a little bit better. And then if someone else repeats this exact same experiment on their own, they should be able to replicate your results, and therefore you start working for closer towards scientific consensus in whatever thing you're doing. If something about this process is wrong, there's a mistake in it, you'll likely get called out for it, right? If somebody is interested enough to dig into it. Did the CAT study go through peer review, and did people call them out? I'm not sure if it was something that anyone was actually interested in replicating that study. And one thing you also have to realize is a lot of studies, and this is something that kind of blew my mind when I came across, a lot of studies are not actual studies. They're not actually doing science, right? What they're actually doing is they're pulling data. They're pulling data, and they're doing exactly what I was talking about with business intelligence, where they're attempting to aggregate and represent data to tell them something. And again, they end up with so many mistakes, right? I remember when I first got on Prilosec, proton pump inhibitor. I remember reading about it that said that PPIs will kill you, right? You will... anyone that gets on PPIs has a high chance of death within 5 years of being on them. Well, I've been on them now for over 6 years, and I got other issues. Well, why would they say something like that? Are they're trying to convince people that PPIs cause dementia, that PPIs cause osteoporosis. They're trying to really convince people of all these different issues that are caused by PPIs. And where are they getting that data from? Well, because the study that they did is they pull in data from all these different medical databases, and they look at what was the medication patient was on and what happened to patient. And they find patterns, and they start to draw false correlations again, where they say, oh, Prilosec kills you. Prilosec will kill you because we found a commonality where so many people were on Prilosec, and then they were terminal, or they came into the hospital and they passed away within the hospital. Like, okay, that is a false representation of the data, right? Prilosec, first off, you can dig into that a million different ways till Tuesday and find all sorts of problems. Like, number one, if you're in the hospital, you're in the hospital, right? So you're not getting data of the people not in the hospital that are on Prilosec and have no issues. So that's your first big problem. That's a big problem, right? Like, that almost just shoots the entire claim right in its face. But then you have to talk about the fact that they're in the hospital. There's something actually wrong with them. More likely than not, people that tend to be on PPIs tend to be older because their body is wearing down. Their lower esophageal sphincter muscle is no longer doing the job it used to do. So they're more likely to have reflux, which is why you're more likely to have reflux the older you get. The older you get, more likely to have something very wrong with you. And so the likelihood that you're on a PPI when you're older is just higher, right? It's just very high. And then the likelihood that you're dealing with a end-of-life condition is higher if you're older, right? Like, that, you have data points that represent one thing. They don't represent more, but you're trying to force them to represent those things. And again, that's a problem. You have to start to wonder, why are they doing this, right? And then you find out, because maybe, the person that publishes that is tainted, right? Maybe they have some sort of unprofessional or inappropriate relationship with a pharmaceutical company that's responsible for producing Zantac, right? I want to say they're H2 blockers, which is, like your Pepcid and your Zantacs, the short-acting, older classification of acid reflux medication, and maybe that's why, right? Or maybe, they work with Pepto-Bismol. I'm not saying that this is the case because I don't actually remember precisely who wrote it and why they wrote it, but that you end up digging and you end up finding stuff like that, and now you obviously can't trust that journalist. But do people actually correlate it to that's the journalist doing that? No, they're more likely than not going to not trust the data, or they're not actually going to trust the medication, right? They're going to, that caused me a lot of undue anxiety when I read that, because I was like, man, I need to be on this, because if I don't, then it likely increases the likelihood that my esophagus gets damaged to the point I get Barrett's, which is pre-cancer, and then I can have esophageal cancer. Esophageal cancer almost always kills you. There isn't a lot of good treatment options for something like that. And so, this went through my head, and, when you have mental health issues like I do, like, that's the last thing you need is to read something like that to cause undue panic. And that's the sort of danger of these two fallacies, sample size as well as correlation. Because, again, that's a sample size fallacy, right? They're not getting any data from the people outside the hospital. None whatsoever. Because, why would you, right? Like, you're not going to report like that. Why would a medical database have data of people who aren't seeking medical treatment, right? Like, doesn't make sense. So, that was a fascinating thing, because what I learned there is that so many medical studies are done like this. So, understand that when you're reading articles or you're reading things where it says study says this or study says that or evidence says that, it's not actually being accurate, and you really need to look into the methods that they use to aggregate that data, and then actually take a couple steps back, look at it holistically. Like, what does this mean holistically? What are they actually trying to say? Do I agree with that? Do I see flaws with that? And when you see flaws like that, you would hope someone comes out and calls it out. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. Now, if you're doing work and you're trying to avoid getting called out on stuff, or you're debating someone, you're getting into an online argument, if you want to have a strong argument and really shut someone down, don't manipulate the data, because if you manipulate the data, that gives you a critical hit box, right? Like, someone could hit that spot and get critical damage because they just have to find it. And now they can use that to beat you to death with it, right? And the argument, and cast doubt on everything you're saying because they caught you either being wrong or intentionally gaslighting on that particular topic. So if you steel man yourself, right, if your argument is near impugnable because the method you use to prop up that argument has been shored up based upon good quality work like this, well, then you have a much higher chance of winning your point. If you can't do that, if for some reason you're in an argument or a debate And it is impossible for you to shore up or scaffold a strong argument like that based upon these principles, then maybe you have a weak argument to begin with. Now, that's not to say I'm saying don't argue it, because sometimes it's good practice, right? It also, if I learned a lot by having debates and being fearful of being wrong, so I had to really, really research things to make sure I wasn't wrong, or to challenge myself to look into these things. And sometimes it's good practice just to see, can you argue a bad argument? There was a period of time I would do that. There was a period of time where I would intentionally go into arguments knowing I was wrong. My opponent knew I was wrong. Everyone watching knew I was wrong. But I would just see, could I convince them otherwise, right? Could I gaslight them into believing other things? Now, I'm not saying that was an honorable thing to do. I'm not saying that was the right thing to do. Especially if you disclose at the end that, you were just doing this for practice, for fun. Then that's one thing. Obviously, don't tarnish relationships, don't ruin relationships, don't burn bridges just because you want to get into an argument with somebody. But there is, the point is I'm saying that there is value in having a bad argument if you think you can still sway the opinion of the person. And it also depends on the format of the debate, right? There's the objective of the debate. If you're going into a debate, if you're on like a debate team, let's say it's like a presidential debate or something like that, the goal is to win something. The goal is to win the debate. Then that's one goal, right? The goal isn't there necessarily to change your opponent's mind, to change, maybe there's a point scoring system, maybe there's something to that, maybe it's meant to make your opponent, maybe making your opponent look bad is more valuable than making yourself look good, right? So that's one thing. There's a lot of different layers to why you might be doing something. If the point is to pass a motion, then that's one thing, right? Like you will say whatever's necessary to pass the motion. But if the point is to share ideas and to have a good, honest, authentic intellectual conversation and share ideas and maybe build relationships, right? So a good example of this is like, at one point I think I watched Sam Harris, back when I used to like him, get into a debate with Daniel Dennett, who has now passed away, about the concept of free will. And that was a conversation where they were sharing ideas, right? Like I don't think they ever found common ground in the end, but they were friends. They weren't trying to downplay each other, hurt each other. They simply wanted to see, was there something the other party or themselves was misunderstanding? So we need to have a good, authentic conversation with good methodology, reduce the likelihood of employing fallacies, and see where we land. Is that common? No. Most debates is I'm trying to pass a motion or I'm trying to win points, and oftentimes it's for the audience. It's not for the belligerents, right? It's not for one guy or the other, one gal or the other. It's for everyone else. You're trying to change everyone else's, or just dunk on the person, right? You're just trying to make them look bad. Those aren't horrible, right? I mean, I don't necessarily think you're going to make a lot of friends doing that, if that's all you ever do, but that is what it is. So anyways, I feel like this was kind of an important topic to cover, because some of the things I would like to talk about moving forward does require a firm understanding in this. And if you're not grasping this, reach out to me on Discord or something, and maybe I can talk to you a little bit more and kind of help you get a better understanding of what this means. Because I need everyone to kind of understand this if you're going to watch my future videos, because it's going to be predicated with the belief that you grasp this. Because there are things that I see all the time. Like, there's just videos that I see left, right, forward, and center that are misrepresenting data based upon these two fallacies, and we have to understand if we are to talk about that. And I don't want to have to recycle the same information constantly because someone's not grasping what this all means. So that being said, y'all have a great rest of your day.